Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Professor Ephraim Inbar, for giving me the opportunity. When he said I'll be the first speaker, I was very excited. But Inbar never told me that I'll be the first speaker after lunch. So it's going to be difficult in terms of keeping you afloat. I'm going to speak on India and the GCC, the geostrategic shift. Islam came to India in the immediate aftermath of Prophet Muhammad. And therefore, Islam is an integral part of India's political landscape. During the British, we had the largest Muslim populations in the world. And today, India has second largest Muslim population after Indonesia. So there are more Muslims in India than in Pakistan and Bangladesh, which were once part of India. We are talking about 180 million. So something like about 20 times the population of Israel. So you have a very strong historical and religious linkages between India and the region. The second thing is geographic proximity. Some of the parts of India are closer to the Persian Gulf cities than to other parts of India. For example, Cochin is probably all familiar with the Jewish presence dating back to 500 years ago, at least, the oldest synagogue in Commonwealth. It is less than 3,000 kilometers from Muscat than to Leh, another popular destination for Israelis in the Himalayas. So geographically, the region is much closer to India. Because of this, you have enormous economic linkages between India and GCC. So when you talk about economics, you normally talk about four major issues: energy security, trade, expatriate Indians, and therefore the remittance. There are enormous linkages between all of them. During the Cold War, Indian economy was pretty small. Our growth rate was somewhere around 3% per year. So therefore, you did not require large quantities of energy. So 2/3 were met internally, only 1/3 was imported from outside the country. Once India began to liberalize and economic progress began to take shape, the picture changed dramatically. So your requirements is no longer met by the domestic production. So during the 1990s, the situation was something like this. 2/3 was imported, only 1/3 was produced internally. But if you look at the statistics, both Indian and international, there is a general consensus that bulk of India's oil and gas will have to be imported from outside. According to BP statistics, by 2030, 90% of India's crude oil will have to be imported. Until 2013, India was the fourth largest importer of oil: US, China, Japan. And today, India has overtaken Japan in terms of the quantity of imports of oil. So 2/3 of this oil comes from the Persian Gulf region. Even though they could actually meet the entire quantities, because of political considerations, we generally decided to keep about 2/3 from the Gulf, the remaining 1/3 from faraway countries like Nigeria and others. With the result, India's trade with the region is enormous. Until recently, let's say about 2014, about 25% of India's total trade was with the Persian Gulf region. Mostly the GCC and also Iran and Iraq put together. So you have a substantial trade with these countries. Okay, there is a flip side. Bulk of the imports from the region to India is dominated by energy. In certain cases, 90% of imports are energy related. The only exception is UAE, where the import is only less than 50% energy, the rest of them are energy related one. With the result, UAE is the third largest trading partner of India with about $50 billion recently, followed by Saudi Arabia. So if you look at the GCC countries, they are among the top 25 trading partners of India. Only 3 smaller economies of the Gulf, Bahrain, Oman, and Yemen. These are the countries whose number is much below. Even, by the way, Israel doesn't come in the top 25 trading partners of India. So when you talk in terms of a trade, GCC is the major trading bloc. If you take one step further, there is what you would call diaspora. I know that technically this is not the word you normally use. Sociologists will object to that. But the Indian community in the region is very substantial. We are talking about something like 7 million, almost closer to the Israeli population we have today. Out of them, about 400,000 in Bahrain, 500,000 in Oman and Qatar, about 700,000 in Kuwait, 2,800 in UAE, 2.8 million in UAE, and about over 3 million in Saudi Arabia. In all these cases, Indians are the largest expatriate community. And in some cases, the Indians actually outnumber the native population. So all you need is a human chain. The rulers will be in trouble. You don't need any extra protest. With the result, you have a substantial remittance from these countries. In spite of all the global crisis, this year we had about $70 billion of investment, that is overseas remittance. Bulk of them comes from these countries. So when you talk about 7 million Indians, you're talking about 7 million families. At the minimum, 30 million Indians are directly benefited from the linkages with the Gulf. If this is the kind of situation, what was the Indian position or reaction towards that? One thing we'll note is that India generally makes a lot of statements on various international issues. If you look at the Arab Spring, India never said anything on the Persian Gulf region. India was critical of Mubarak after it was very clear that he is no longer going to stay in power. And when the last Indian was evacuated from Egypt, till such time, we never said anything. And the only thing you see about in the case of Yemen was travel advisories. Indians should not go to Yemen unless it is absolutely necessary. But if you look at the Government of India figures, in 2014, in spite of that, there were 100,000 Indians working in Yemen. We never issued a travel advisory on Bahrain, no matter what was happening. The reason is simple. If there is any crisis in the region, it is almost humanly impossible for you to evacuate the Indian citizens. How do you evacuate 3 million people, say, from Saudi Arabia? You actually need a bridge. There is no way you can airlift them. So if you look at it, because of the presence of Indians in this region, and because of your economic linkages with the region, you never said anything on the Arab Spring, not even remotely linking that, you should reform. Even though the demands of the population in the Arab countries are not different from some of the Indian demands 50 years ago. Good governance and everything, it's the same story. But because of political and geostrategic consideration, you maintain what I would call a studied silence on the Arab Spring. There is an interesting thing. During the Cold War, India, in spite of whatever I may think about my country, India was an irrelevant player. It is not a politically important power. You were dependent on the international community. You had something called Aid India Consortium. What is that? It's a beggars club in a 5-star hotel. India had what you would call mixed economy. What is a mixed economy? You are supposed to get the best out of both. But we ended up, the corruption, inefficiency of the socialist model, and the profit-driven model of the capitalism. You are actually supposed to get the better one. Socialist orientation as well as efficiency, we got the negative side. So as long as Cold War was prevailing, India was an irrelevant player. I don't know how many of you are familiar with how an Indian man will deal with a financial crisis. The first thing he will do is go to his wife, give me your jewelry. You literally mortgage the jewelry. That is exactly what the government of India did when he did not have foreign exchange reserves for more than 2 weeks of essential commodity imports. We've flown about 200 tons of gold to London, mortgaged it with the Bank of London and paid for your foreign exchange. That was the situation in 1991. See, it was only after economic liberalization you began to have a different world. Today, India is seen as the third largest economy in Asia. In purchasing power parity, it is seen as the fourth largest economy in the world, no matter how you look at it. So with the result, it is with this economic development, India began to see certain things differently. So earlier, you looked at the oil import merely as a necessity. Now you're looking at it as an opportunity for the other person. Oil-producing countries will have to export. They can't just drink it. So therefore, India is seen as a long-term stable market. It is in those conditions India began to play a different role. And this is where Pakistan comes into picture. During the Cold War, an Israeli diplomat described Pakistan as a center of gravity of India. So you looked at the whole world through the Pakistani prism. You never had anything independent. So you had to choose between India and Pakistan. From the 1990s, you have a careful shift. The logic is there. India wants to be a South Asian player or an Indian or an Asian power. We may have a disagreement whether India should be a great power. That's a different argument. So the moment you want to play a greater role, you no longer want to compete with Pakistan. That is why you will see Pakistan getting less important in India's engagement with the Middle East. I'm not saying Pakistan is irrelevant, but you no longer look at the world through the Pakistani prism. And therefore, you have a very interesting development. Some of the Arab countries are saying India as a friend, Pakistan as a brother. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Indian mythology. And if you're familiar with the Indian mythology, I would rather be a friend than a brother, with all the consequences. But in spite of this, the political neglect of the region was substantial. We never paid corresponding attention to the leadership. The political visits between India and the Gulf countries were almost non-existent. The only exception was Saudi Arabia, where Indians periodically had an engagement. Even there was no substantial follow-up action. The last Indian prime ministers to visit Iraq, in spite of all the link, was 1975. The last visit to UAE was in 1981. So some of the visits are only by Indira Gandhi. Since 1947, no Indian prime minister has ever visited Bahrain. From 2010, after the visit of Indian president to the region, just a month before the Arab Spring, no Indian president, prime minister, or the vice president ever visited this region. That was the kind of relationship we had until Modi comes into picture in 2014. Yes, becoming the de facto foreign minister of India. By all accounts, last year, he traveled more countries than Obama. He almost travels most of the time. Probably we may be seeing him more in the airports than in the national capital. So very often he takes the flight. With the result, he has visited 4 countries in the Gulf, all on the Gulf coast, no other places. He went to UAE in August last year. Then this year, he went to Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Qatar. In addition, he met the Salman first as a crown prince, then as a king in G20 meetings. So what he's saying today is an interesting political engagement between India and the GCC. The only Middle Eastern countries he's yet to visit is Israel. My understanding is probably sometime around January next year. When both countries celebrate 25 years of normalization, we may expect a visit either around that time or after that. So Israel is the only country he has not visited, but all the other countries he visited are on the Persian Gulf. Only Iran is non-GCC countries. The second thing which is visible in Modi's thing is using the Indian community for political purposes. He's able to use them as a linkage between the two, and therefore it is interesting he's seeing as a bridge between the two. The agenda is economic. Whether he's talking about UAE, he talks about 75 billion investment project. When he talks about Qatar, he talks about India not having to pay the extra price for the gas imports. He's talking about 500 million investment in Chabahar port in Iran. So all the countries, the agenda is political. But there is also a security cooperation. For a long time, when you talk about security, you only talk about Israel. But now what is interesting is Modi's engagement with the Gulf is also percolates into security level. And some of the Indians working in the region seem to be affiliated or attracted by ISIS. And therefore, India has to have high-level cooperation on the counter-terrorism front. We can say the number of Indians involved is very small. We are talking about a couple of dozens in 180 million population. But we also know the September 11 was carried out by 24 people. So the number is not the real issue, but the lethal nature of the action. Therefore, you will find enormous cooperation. Our present ambassador in Riyadh was a police chief in Mumbai before he came to Riyadh. So that's the kind of indications India is saying we are going to have. What are the challenges? I would say just 4. One is Iran. India needs cooperation with Iran as well as Saudi Arabia. How we are going to manage it? Because we did not manage the triangle between Iran and the United States over the nuclear question. So India should not make the same mistake of not able to manage the triangle. The second thing is sectarian divide. Whether one likes it or not, there is a division within the region is there. The interesting thing is, not only India has 180 million Muslims, it also has the largest Shia population in the world after Iran. So therefore, the Shia-Sunni difference is not only a foreign policy agenda, it is also a domestic agenda if you don't play your cards carefully. So you will have to pay the price. The Saudis and Shias and the Iranians will be playing in the Indian cities. So you have to be careful with that. The third point is the low oil price. The Indian migration is growing because oil price was high. The moment the prices go down, which means your infrastructure projects are going to slow down, which means the number of Indians going to the region will become smaller. There is a talk about Arabization of the labor force, nitakat and everything else, but even though the fallout is not there, you're going to see in the years to come. There is an increase about women being co-opted into the labor force. If all of them things happen, you will have a definite impact on the quantity of Indians in the region, or also the skills which are going to be coming with them. This is going to be a major problem. This will be a social impact in the places like Kerala, where 50% of the Indians in the Gulf are from this region. The last point is India's engagement in the region is taking place what I would call very unfortunate timing, the decline of the United States. We all agree that the US influence is on the wane. With the result, so many countries will be trying to play a role in the absence or competing with the United States in the Persian Gulf. India will be entering it. At one level, there is an improvement in India-US relationship, but the Gulf will not be the place where you will see the benefit. I'll stop at this point. Thank you very much.